everybody. My name is Ismael Chartier. I'm the Executive Director of Renew Wisconsin. I would just want to remind everyone that the session equips Wisconsin clean energy leaders with the financial tools, structure, strategic thinking needed to grow market sustainability with or without federal incentives. We're joined by a powerhouse group of experts. Powerhouse group of experts. We have Isaiah Ness, CEO of Sun Bear Industries, Francisco Saya, who is the Vice President of Productivity and Sustainability at the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. And then we have Grant Schneider, who is a Senior Associate at Keys & Fox, LLP. So we're going to start this out with a lightning round for in 60 to 90 seconds. I want you guys to each of you, give me a quick snapshot of what you do day to day. And then on top of that, what financing approach are you most excited about Wisconsin trying to pursue? Isaiah, we'll start with you.
Got it.
You have to hold it. It's like the Nuremberg trials.
All right, cool. Isaiah Ness, CEO of Sun Bear Industries. We do renewable energy development for tribes, nonprofits, and communities nationwide. And so what we really focus on is not only the study of putting a good plan and feasibility in place, but also how do we allow communities to take ownership of energy assets. And so I'm dealing with most of the B2B relationships or most of the B to tribal community relationships, working through financing structures, working through development projects, working through contractors that are coming in to do a lot of these projects. And I think the thing that I'm most excited about, especially in our line of work with tribes, is just some of the development capabilities and how within chaos, there's always opportunities for more ownership or to provide an innovative solution to the market. And so we have a lot of clients right now that are purchasing or in the process of purchasing utility assets. We have a lot of clients that are trying to safe harbor as many projects as they possibly can to continue to develop energy systems. And so I think if we can get some sort of green bank or financing structure in place, the opportunity will only grow. So.
Mr. Francisco.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. My name is Francisco Saju, and for the past 2 years, I have been working with the State Economic Development Agency, WDC, helping stand up the state's Green Bank. If you have been following the Wisconsin's energy story, you probably know that back in 2022, Governor Evers released the first clean energy plan for the state. That clean energy plan has a roadmap to take the state to net zero by 2050. And one of the things in that roadmap was creating a green bank, a financing entity to provide the financing tools for deployment of these technologies. So that's my job, which means that I spend my days working with individuals, communities, businesses, trying to figure out how we finance the technologies that they need to meet their energy needs in a way that is affordable. So it's taking needs and ideas into a project that a lender can actually finance. Like, this is a need, this is an idea, but this is something that we can take to a lender and say, we need some money for this. So that's what I do. And I do it because, we need reliable and affordable energy for the state to keep us competitive and livable. And what am I bullish about? I am, this is a big challenge, and I think we need all the tools, so I think I'm for all the tools. I am bullish not about the tools, but about the actual goal that we're trying to achieve, which is to secure our energy supply. Wisconsin imports a lot of energy from our state. Its money goes out, and we never see it. My dream is that one day Wisconsin can have a local, reliable energy supply. And I think a lot of you are familiar with the idea of farm to table, right? I want Wisconsin to be known as a state where we also have, farm to heat pumps and farm to electric vehicles, because we have the capacity to create our own energy here. So I'll leave it there.
Grant.
Hi, everyone. My name's Grant Snyder, Senior Associate with Keys & Fox. We're a boutique litigation firm traditionally working on litigation before state public utility commissions, with a lot of my work focusing on work before the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin and the Illinois Commerce Commission. A lot of my clients are solar trade associations, so that kind of runs the gamut between rooftop solar, community scale or community solar developers, and utility scale installers. In states that are a little bit further along in the distributed energy journey, I do a lot of things related to virtual power plant program design. In Wisconsin, my work has focused more on issues related to rooftop installers and building out an incentive structure which makes it attractive for households and small commercial developments to go solar. And in terms of the financing option I'm the most bullish on, we'll talk about this, but I think there's a lot of potential to grow the rooftop solar market in Wisconsin by unlocking third-party financing, but we have to figure out some regulatory hurdles to get there.
Thank you very much. So Isaiah, my first question is for you. Tribal nations often face unique constraints and unique strengths. From what you've seen, what are the biggest structural barriers to tribal clean energy financing, and what are the biggest opportunities that non-tribal communities don't have?
Yeah, I would say the biggest barrier is you have a sovereign nation within a state that most of the time when you bring up an energy issue, the Public Service Commission is pretty much hands off. So it's a lot of utility to tribe negotiations directly. And there's always an end to where utilities don't understand that concept. And so we had a conversation last week, major utility in the state of Wisconsin, they're like, why should we treat the tribe different than Walmart down the street? And I said, well, if you don't treat the tribe different than Walmart down the street, I'm going to pull all your easements and right-of-ways. So there's a pretty simple direction, which is, I mean, obviously not preferred. We'd prefer to work with people before we have to get into that discussion. But I think the reality that we face, that tribes and everyone else face as well, is that you're dealing with a monopolistic control, right? So you have utilities who, they charge these fees for infrastructure upgrades, yet most of the infrastructure does not get upgraded unless needed. And so what we see as a significant opportunity from the tribal perspective that is really creating opportunity for the industry as a whole is this diversity in ownership. We want to see more people have control over ownership on energy supplies. We want to see, investor-owned utilities be held to the same standard that we are on the bill-paying side or on the customer side, right? You don't pay your bill long enough, they will shut off your power, or you'll get hit with fees until you do pay your bill. And we want to put those accountability metrics in control. And one of the things that we're really focused on is how do we deploy it within tribal communities in a way that it benefits the industry and the state as a whole, because that diversifying ownership is a huge opportunity.
Thank you very much. Francisco, in plain terms, because you have me, you're talking to me, what is a green bank and why is it one of the most powerful tools for durable clean energy financing beyond federal incentives?
I don't have to remember this one. I will answer that question, but before I answer the question, I want to comment on something you started with, saying the threat for the easements and the right-of-ways. That's very effective because few years ago, I actually had AT&T remove one of their poles on my property because they were not very nice to me. So that's very effective. It really works. They pay attention to you when you threaten with that. And I can tell you that story later if you want, but it's a fun one. So the question was, what is a green bank and why is a good tool in addition to federal incentives? So and I think, when I hear the question, two things come to mind. The first one is, let's define what a green bank is. So a green bank is a mission-driven financial entity created to provide financing and to provide technical assistance to clean energy projects. So it's like a bank, not a depository bank, so we don't take anybody's money to pay for stuff. It's just makes loans, provides financing, and financing is key to clean energy projects. And green banks come in a lot of different flavors, and you have public green banks, like the Connecticut Green Bank, funded by state government. You have public green banks that are county level. You have some municipal level green banks. You also have quasi-public green banks, and WDC is a quasi-public entity, so our green bank is a quasi-public green bank. And you have independent nonprofit green banks. And we all have the same goal, which is provide financing and technical assistance to clean energy projects, but we do it in a lot of different ways. And some of that is dependent on where the funding comes from. So that's basic definition of what a green bank is. You have a fund, you have an entity, you finance clean energy projects. Now, incentives are different because incentives are not necessarily financing. They're not financing. And I went to the previous presentation, and Paul did a really good job talking about his Greenspire project, like one of my heroes, for sure. Great job. Keep doing that. That project was, it happened in part because you have access to some incentives that made it possible, right? So incentives are one thing that you put on your capital stack to make your project happen. Financing is another thing that you put on your capital stack, but those things are different. And a project can happen without incentives. And that's kind of where the solar industry is moving to, given the environment we are at. But for those projects to happen without incentives, you really need a solid financing environment where you can basically cash flow that project. Make sure that the investment that you're making in the year one, that you're able to pay for that over a number of years, because, some of you own a home and you have a mortgage. It will be pretty tough to go to somebody and say, hey, here's $500,000 and I want a home. That's why the banks invented mortgages, right? And then you say, hey, I'm just gonna pay this amount every year, but I get to live in this home, and then one day it's mine. But it was made possible because there was an entity that helped you finance it. Same thing with solar, same thing with energy efficiency, right? We want you to have access to technology that costs money and for you to pay it over time. So that's what the Green Bank does. Incentives are different.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Grant, third-party ownership is one of the most common deal structures in clean energy, except for in Wisconsin. Can you explain the basic anatomy of a TPO deal and why it matters so much?
Yes. So I'll back up a little bit and provide a little bit of background on how a deal in Wisconsin would work now, and then we'll zoom in for third-party ownership. So a pre-2026 deal in Wisconsin, rooftop solar for a household, small commercial customer. The customer is typically making their money back with two big incentives, although there are other incentives. So you have the investment tax credit, which would provide an individual with a 30% reduction on the purchase price of the system that they get to take out against their tax liability. And then the net metering structures through which a person is able to reduce their bill and receive a reduced bill over time, with eventually those structures combining such that somebody makes their money back over the course of time. So the credit is changing. I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And for net metering, I assume most everyone is familiar, but essentially you get paid at the retail rate for the electricity that you produce, you export. It's not payment. We don't describe it as payment. You get compensated for your exported generation, and you essentially wind the meter back. And when we think about payback periods, things along those lines, we've represented Renew in proceedings a few years ago, where with these major incentive structures in place, rooftop solar owner, like a typical household, would make their money back within 10 years. So in these scenarios, there are several financing options. Customer can just pay outright for the solar system, what we would call like a cash deal. Or they can take out a private loan, which is oftentimes facilitated by the installer, but not always. So how does third-party ownership invert this structure? So third-party ownership is a structure where the customer does not actually own the solar system, but has a solar array located on their premises, and the customer can access some of the benefits associated with customer-owned solar, but at a much lower upfront cost. So there's two types that are very common in the industry, so solar leases and solar power purchase agreements. So with a solar lease, the third-party owner installs, often at no or little upfront cost to the customer, a solar array on the customer's home. And then from there, the customer will pay a lease payment to the third-party owner of the system, but generally otherwise would receive the benefits on their utility bill of the system, including net metering. So when a customer receives his or her utility bill, the bill will reflect the impact of the solar system, even though the customer does not own the system, and the customer then will make a separate lease payment to the third-party owner. So a customer typically saves money under this arrangement because the difference between what they would have paid without solar is what they end up paying with the reduced utility bill and the lease payment is less than what their utility bill would have been had they not had solar in the first place. So a solar PPA is similar. It's installed in the same way. But rather than a lease, the customer agrees to pay the solar company a per kilowatt hour rate for the reduction in a customer's electricity bill produced by the third-party panels. And this way this ends up working is a lot of times it functions like a straight discount on a customer's bill, but spread across, again, these two payments. So like with the solar bill, the customer's bill will reflect the benefits of the solar system by reducing the bill in accordance with the customer's generation, but the customer will typically pay a fraction of the retail price for the reduction rather than the lease payment. And I can explain how that works in a little bit more detail if folks are interested. But this is also how community solar structures work for those who are familiar. And so under both arrangements, the customer will make these two payments that we're describing, so one to the utility and one to the third-party owner, to the PPA holder. Unless you're in a state that's a little bit farther along, and there are some states like this that actually just put all of this on the utility bill. And so third-party ownership is particularly attractive for customers who lack capital to purchase panels or who do not wish to take out a loan or do not have sufficient tax liability to make the investment tax credit work. And so for the third-party owner, this arrangement typically works for them because they're able to turn a profit once you combine the various incentives that they get for the various incentives they have access to. So because they own the system, they would actually be the entity that receives the tax credits, any applicable rebates, and the RECs associated with the project. And then they would also receive things like the subscription, lease, or PPA fees that would be paid by the customers. And so for the installers in the room, third-party owned systems are often installed by local contractors authorized by the third-party company. And the third-party owner will own the equipment and handle financing, but will often hire these local installers to perform the actual installation, permitting, and grid connection associated with installation. In terms of prevalence, these are very prevalent. 33 states allow for either solar leases or solar PPAs, including neighbors such as Michigan, Illinois, and Iowa. And it's a huge part of the solar market in general. Some recent data I found estimated that third-party owned systems constitute about 23% of the historic residential solar market for solar or for residential customers, with the number growing in recent years to just under half of installations due to increasing interest rates and the subsequent reduction of customers who wanted to use loans to finance their systems. So in the non-residential space, third-party ownership has been the predominant financing model for a long time, for several years, and more than 2/3 of megawatts installed in recent years have been third-party owned systems.
Thank you so much. There's a microphone there. If people want to ask questions during or after anyone speaks, you can walk up to the mic and we'll make space for you, or you can wait till the end and we'll make space for you. I'm going to ask Isaiah a question, but it's probably going to have a follow-up. So the question is, if a tribal nation wants to build renewables but doesn't want to give away ownership, what financing models actually work today?
I would say the most common financing model that we work with is bridge loans or some sort of equity being taken out on another asset or within a treasury service that the tribe is utilizing. And so if a tribe is working with a big bank and they have treasury yield bonds, often we're looking at that same financing institution for these projects. I'd say the thing that is related to what both of the other gentlemen are going to speak about is this concept of CDFIs. So the community development financial institutions, it's similar to a green bank structure, not holding savings or checking accounts, but in a position to deploy capital on bridge loan financing, short-term financing, sometimes long-term. And so we work with a lot of CDFIs. We work with a lot of large banks to try and stand up these programs. Obviously, when we were talking about a solar for all timeframe, the world was a lot more optimistic on this structure, but that is generally how we're looking at financing a lot of these projects. Grants are dwindling, I would say, in a lot of scenarios, just given the political climate. So most of it is we're either have a financing structure in place through an existing partner, or we're looking at a cash-based system and looking to utilize a direct pay either formally for the project and just holding on to the cash balance of that project, or using the direct pay in a bridge loan structure where essentially the tax credit amount for tribes in a lot of our scenarios is 50%, so 50 cents on the dollar. They would take out a bridge loan for the same amount that their direct pay would be for a said so amount of period until the direct pay is expected to come back. So usually we're looking at 18 to 24 months on bridge loans.
Recently, didn't CDFIs lose some funding from the Trump administration?
A lot of people lost funding from the administration, and so yes, a lot of the CDFIs have lost funding, and so now what we're looking for is larger financing partners and larger banks and institutions to step in and provide CDFIs with the oversight and potentially excess capital. And so there's some people in this room that are going to be familiar with the process, but a lot of times the CDFI is orchestrating the loan, and they're bringing in several small banks as well to contribute to actual lending capabilities. And so that's kind of the workaround to the lost funding.
No questions about that? You guys are just going to let that go? Okay. Francisco, walk us through what capital stacking looks like in practice. What combinations of funding tools can Wisconsin use to finance projects at scale? Things like credit enhancement, loan loss reserves, co-lending, those kind of tools.
So capital stacking and how financing tools. See, this is going to be a learning curve. So the question is, walk you through capital stacking, what capital stacking is, and how we can use different financing tools to build capital stacks. So I have visual aids. So this is your capital stack, right? So you're building a project, you're building a multifamily development. You need to come up with money, and that money is going to come from different sources. So let's say you have, you're going to put solar. No, even better. You're going to do geothermal. That tax credit is still alive. Use it. So you're going to do geothermal. You get your 30, 40, or 50% tax credit, right? So these are your tax credits. You're also working with Focus on Energy, so you're going to get your Focus on Energy incentive, right? That's not going to pay for the whole project, so you have to go and find a bank that's willing to lend you money. So that's your financing. Boom. That's your capital stack, right? That's how you build it. Is it clear? Now, the second part of the question is, what financing tools can we deploy? And that only applies to this, because this stuff is grants, this is free money, use it. Financing. So your financing tools applies to only financing, and there you can do a lot of stuff, and that's where I spend my days. Figuring out what tools we can use to make those transactions actually move, to get this capital stack full, right? So we have credit enhancements, and those are basically ways to de-risk investments. So if you have a lender, you're going to have to be working with a lender unless you have a whole bunch of money under your mattress. And depending on who you are and your credit score and a whole bunch of stuff, the lender might be more or less comfortable giving you a certain amount of money. So credit enhancements basically reduce the risk or the perceived risk that lender see in that transaction and say, okay, I'm going to give you the loan, or I'm going to lower your interest rate to make it more attractive. And that's a lot of the work that we do, is figuring out how we unlock money from entities that actually have the money, because we don't, so that money flows into projects. That's a lot of what green banks do. It's enhancing credit to allow access to loans or capital that otherwise would not be accessible. Okay. Did I answer the question?
You answered it perfectly. All right. It's like you know what you're talking about. That powerhouse statement is coming back to me. Grant, how can TPO structures unlock financing for smaller projects, residential schools, nonprofits, municipalities, and community scale development in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so because of the lack of upfront costs, third-party ownership allows low to middle income homeowners, churches, schools, government agencies, nonprofits, and small businesses to adopt solar and not make the capital expenditures, which can be difficult for these types of customers. And you asked about community scale development. Third-party ownership can also be used as a tool in group purchases of solar arrays facilitated by larger entities such as municipalities. So I've seen group buy programs before. where there are two options provided to participants, either a direct purchase program or a lease arrangement. And in the coming years, I think third-party ownership can sustain the residential solar market with the expiration of the 25D tax credit. This is the one that would have been available to customer-owned solar generation facilities previously. So assuming everything else stays the same, losing the tax credit would make going solar less attractive because it would extend that payback period that we were talking about and the time for someone to make their money back on a customer-owned generation system. But third-party owners still have a strong incentive to deploy solar and offer competitive pricing for the next few years, because another provision of the BBB allows third-party owners who install residential systems to receive the commercial investment tax credit under Section 48E. So for the next few years, they're going to have access to that. So third-party owners are looking to ramp up operations over the next few years to access the tax credit and are getting ready to deploy in markets where these markets are available. So, and I'll also add that third-party ownership does not only work with tax credits provided to owners, so it's not like they're going to just go away when the tax credits go away, but these entities will still operate after the expiration of the 480 tax credits, and their business model will continue to be attractive for customers in states with higher electricity prices who will find benefit from otherwise reducing their electricity bills through third-party ownership structures.
Yeah, and our electricity bills aren't going to go down anytime soon. I don't hear anybody trying to cut them, you know. Yes, sir.
Would the contractor that was interested in getting into this, would he be the third party?
The third party would be like a larger, probably multi-state entity, and then the installer would be the entity that would be contracting with the third party to do the installation.
So the third party would be like a bank?
Like one of the most notable third parties is Sunrun. Like it would be like an entity like that would be the third party owner, and then you as an installer would contract with them to do installation.
So the installer's just doing that?
Just doing the work.
Just doing the work on the
Okay.
on the actual installation
So wait
end.
for the installer to be invested third party wise?
Could an installer become invested third party wise? I assume, yeah, I think so. It's just the way that we interacted is typically with the big third party owners, but I don't think there's a prohibition on that.
It would just be a lot of financial upfront for the installer, you know, but you could work with a bank like BMO or another organization like that also.
Somebody backing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Isaiah, my question for you is, how do we structure financing so that tribal and community projects just don't get built, but they create long-term local wealth, jobs, and controls for our tribes?
A lot of it I'll touch on too in the workforce development that we're doing this afternoon, but that's everything. And so similar to a third-party ownership structure, what we try and do is take a similar approach within community-based projects, tribal or non-tribal, to get local workforce involvement, especially when it comes to operation and maintenance, especially when it comes to some of the things that you don't need an electrician for, right? Trenching, basic site work, things along those lines. I'll add to that point as well, based on what we just discussed. One opportunity as far as capital stacks and financing goes is safe harboring these tax credits. That is a big thing that I want to make sure everyone understands. The ability to safe harbor a tax credit for 4 more years is something to be noticed. And one of the things that we worked on actually with a partner in the room at Baker Tilly was safe harboring several projects before FIAC and some of the BABA requirements went into effect on January 1st. And so what we did is we purchased megawatts worth of Q-cell panels, understanding that they would be able to be deployed on several projects, that if FIAC came into play, even though it wasn't supposed to, that we had a compliant panel. But essentially, by spending that 5 to 10% of the total project cost, you're able to safe harbor millions of dollars. So even if you aren't exactly sure where your capital deployment is going, and when we talk about forecasting future models, the ability to safe harbor is something that I want to make sure everyone understands. Because if you're trying to build $20 million worth of solar and you don't have a plan exactly of where it's going to go, if you can get to a spot where you spend that $1 million, you've safe harbored $20 million worth of solar. In our case, on the tribal side, that's $10 million worth of tax credits. For the private sector, you're looking at less, right? But you're still safe harboring a significant amount, $6 million worth of tax credits. And so understanding that component plus the planning for the future and local workforce involvement is a key component to project success.
You have a question? Oh, go ahead, Francisco.
No, just a quick follow-up, just for those who might not be fully familiar with like safe harboring. What's that again?
The safe harbor there's a deadline that was set into place July 3rd, 2026 is when you need to safe harbor a project by. So there's two stipulations for it. There are accountants in the room that are smarter than this at me. So I'll say this, you can either start construction, civil work does not count, so grading, excavating, or dirt moving does not count towards starting construction. But if you put a pier in, or if you put an inverter pad in, or you put a helical in, that starts construction. The other option is spending 5% of the total project cost. What we're doing with most of our clients is shooting for 10%, if applicable, just because project costs can increase with time. There's all these contingencies, especially when you're talking about large-scale projects. And so essentially, if you do either of those two things, by July 3rd, 2026, you have 4 more years to complete that project and claim the full tax credit amount. If you do not, you have to complete that project fully commissioned before 2028. And so it's the difference of having to finalize all your utility data, turn on that system by December 31st, 2027, or the difference of having until 2030 to complete projects. Where this is applicable is when we start talking about megawatt size projects. Commercial size, you should be able to not have to worry as much about safe harbor unless you are doing series of commercial and you have one installer that's going to be going one after another, and you're going in a sequential order. And so generally over a megawatt, it's a good idea to start thinking about a safe harbor.
Yeah, would you like rolling questions, or would you prefer to wait until the end?
We can do what you guys, get in where you fit in.
Do whatever. My name is Matthew Cronschnabel. I work for Ethos Green Power in Viroqua, Wisconsin. I'm also the president of the Vernon Crawford Farmers Union chapter, just for a little bit of context of who the heck am I. But this question is for Grant in terms of the third-party ownership structures you're referencing here. To my mind, I see this potentially making some good sense in terms of like commercial scale, manufacturing scale projects, but I do feel like a level of apprehension when we get to talking about middle and lower income residential scale projects and the high likelihood of predatory practices, especially as we know rates are going to go up and folks who don't have money often don't have a choice. And we know the number one barrier to installing solar at this point, I mean, in my experience, is not convincing people that it's legit, it's the money, right? So could you speak to a little bit, what sorts of regulatory practices you would see to protect our communities from predatory practices? Thank you.
Yeah, so these things do come up. I mean, this presents itself, somebody who is a middle income, lower income individual gets presented with like a 40-page contract for like a third-party ownership agreement. These are things that trade associations locally could address. So like a Renew could develop like best practices for financing terms, leasing terms, things along those lines. This is also an avenue that if folks determine that this was necessary, this could be an avenue for rulemakings at the commission. The commission could engage in some sort of practice to set standards for offerings and the way that these things can be like presented. But yes, you are correct that there is a possibility here that these issues could apply. But there's also sort of a sense in the industry that those types of entities quickly get kind of like a bad name and have to deal with that, and that more legitimate organizations will supersede them and end up getting more business as a result.
If I can quickly follow up on that, I have no expertise on third party, but I can share that one example that I think is a good example of how it works when it works well, and that's Connecticut Green Bank is the oldest quasi-public green bank in the nation. They've been around for a long time, done a lot of work, have enabled a lot of solar systems, residential solar systems for low income, and part of their success formula is working with a third-party developer. So they basically hired this company, Posigen, which Posigen just closed after the BBB, that's the big, beautiful bill, if you can call it that. Because that kind of messed with their model, right? They really heavily relied on the tax credit. But so Connecticut Green Bank, working with a third-party developer, have enabled a lot of low-income households access to solar, and it's a success story. So it can be done.
Thanks. This question's for Grant. Would you agree that DATCAP is the entity that's responsible for consumer protection in Wisconsin? That's part one of the question. And then part two of the question is, you know I'm going to give you a compound question here because no one can object. Part two of the question is, would you agree that in some of the statutes that you've seen across the country where third-party financing is made clear in statute, or where a long glide path to net metering is made clear in statute, that sometimes you'll see some consumer protection provisions included in those types of statutes, and that the solar industry traditionally has supported including those types of consumer protection provisions in statute?
Yes, to leading questions, yes. So just in response to what Tim was saying, this is probably a DATCAP issue rather than a commission issue, just to clarify. But yes, there have been, through solar industry associations, there have been assertions of that we need these regulations in place, that we need rules in place to protect low and middle income folks, and that the solar industries have generally been supportive of these types of measures.
Hi, Paul Schechter, Sunnyside Development. Question is for anyone who would like to answer it. And it sort of was formulated as you all were speaking, but our nonprofit, in addition to multifamily larger development, we did a few solar grants for single-family homes owned by low-income folks, and we used ARPA money for it, and the tax credit helped as well. That's changed now, obviously, and my question is about the third-party ownership. And there's no residential tax credit anymore. But if an entity like us maybe grouped 5 or 10 homes together and we owned the solar that went on their rooftops, then we could get the 30% and potentially even 20% bonus for being low income. That's 50% of the cost, similar to the tribal. How long would we need to own the solar for, and after which we could just give it back to the families?
That I do not know. I would probably need to do some research before I gave you anything definitively on that front.
Yeah, what I can say, we're doing something similar in Milwaukee with a neighborhood organization. Generally, they say 5 years is what that ownership timeline is. It is very, very doable in that sense, and it's pretty much the only way you're going to do community solar without classifying it as a community solar larger DG site. Very, very doable, and in that model, I think what you would have to figure out as an organization is how you're bringing funds to the table. That's the big conversation right now. Is obviously you want to make sure that you are providing lower energy costs for the homeowners that are going to be staying there, but you are essentially the third-party financing owner of that system. And so you either need to have internal funds that you can use to spend towards those projects, or you need to have some sort of philanthropic or debt-based financing that is somewhat flexible and unrestricted backing your program.
Sure. Just to follow up, bridge loans until the direct pay. So we are a nonprofit, so we would get that. And or alternatively, the credit is still transferable, right? so it could be sold to a different entity for cash.
Correct. And the only thing to be careful about with the bridge loan is the term in which you're doing it. Make sure you have a good team reviewing that, either a compliance team or an accounting team, because the tax credit timeline is still very unclear. And even in the pre-registration process, you might not know until the very last second that there's an error in your pre-registration portal. And so where I've seen bridge loans fail is people go with 18 months, assuming that everything is going to be perfect on the tax front, and then they actually need 22 months or 24 months. So just make sure that you have your terms clear and somewhat flexible.
I'm going to try and get away with asking two questions. First one maybe is simpler. Do tribes, because of their sovereignty, can they do third-party ownership in ways that the rest of the state cannot?
I think the answer to this is yes.
Yes.
They can. Interesting. We don't need to go into details. The yes is enough to do further research, but okay. Then, completely unrelated, with regards to safe harbor, you used the example of buying equipment before projects were identified. Can you tell me a little bit about the kind of documentation that you need, to leave an audit trail for that? And does that differ for smaller projects that are like less than a megawatt and a half versus the larger projects?
Yeah, there's different requirements as far as like the Build America, Buy America requirements, the FIOC requirements at that megawatt and a half and less, and actually at the megawatt threshold and more. So the requirements are slightly different. And the other piece that I should clarify is the safe harbor is really the time where if you have a pretty good idea of what your projects are going to be. You don't want to go into it and say, we're just going to buy these panels and we'll figure out our projects later, unless you have a clear development timeline. And so you want to somewhat have scoped out projects and have an idea of conceptually where they're going to be. And the concept is, like when we were doing ours, we knew that buying a 580 watt Q-cell panel was going to have commercial, utility, and community scale applications if needed. We knew that we had 3 systems where we were going to need at least a megawatt of panels. We weren't exactly sure what those systems were yet, but we knew that there was reciprocity between each site of using that panel. And so a lot of it is the safe harbor is really giving you time to finalize some of those details, finalize some of the engineering, finalize some of the interconnection distribution studies if needed. And so it's just buying time, but you want to have a pretty clear concept of where you're going to start.
This is going to be our last question because we typically end at noon and it's lunch. So you're up against lunch. So
sorry. My question's for Francisco. I work for Focus on Energy, and I think with the kind of phasing out, especially of the solar tax credits, projects that were interested in implementing solar solely for that and maybe less about like the clean energy aspect of it, do you think that green banks could do to convince those customers to continue with that project to include solar? And are there barriers that you see with customers not wanting to use green banks, maybe because of the association with it, if they're not really pro sustainability or clean energy, trying to get them to take advantage of your financing just because it makes sense?
Great. It's a two-part question. The first one is, the incentives are going away. How are we going to convince them that this is still worth it? So 2 parts to that. The first one is, I think there is consensus in the industry that the price of solar has to go down. It's going to go down somehow. Australia, it's a portion of the cost that is here. And we know there's a lot of things that go into that, but so we have to be more efficient on how we deploy capital, and then the financing has to work. At the end of the day, the incentives and the tax credit made the numbers pencil. We have to figure out how the projects pencil without that. It's changing the name of the things. Like, it was a tax credit, now it's financing that is really good. Project pencil, I'll do it. Second part of the question is, how are we gonna convince them to come and talk to the green bank if they don't care about the stuff that we care about? Well, that one is tough, because if you don't like me and you don't want to talk to me, that's okay. I'm not gonna go out chase you. Like, I mean, I think there is events like this. I come because, this work is hard. Honestly, like it is hard. Some days, like, why am I doing this, right? And I need to recharge. And I come here and I see there is enough people that care about this that I can go for another 364 days and just So yeah, if I'm not in the business of convincing people doing things that are against their values, right? But there is enough of us that it will keep us busy. Did that answer? All right.
So I want to thank our panel for coming in. I really appreciate you guys showing up. Tim said this is the coolest panel in the building. So I hope you all agree that it's the coolest panel in the building. I want to thank you guys for coming and listening to the conversation. These guys will be here. I'm not going to say all day, but they're going to be here for a minute or two. So you can grab them and ask them questions periodically or grab their contact information and follow up with them. Thank you so much. I think lunch is being served upstairs. So yalla, go upstairs. Have a good day.